Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you may be watching this. I am Jamie Moeller, and this is the Grad Connection, where my goal is to try to help graduate students do more than just survive. I want to see you thrive. And so we've been going through this research series, and I was kind of wrestled with myself about whether I wanted to move on from methodology. And I really kind of came to the conclusion I think I need to cover when I talk about research, I talk about quantitative research, which is typically numerical and uses statistics, at least in my mind, and that's probably pretty much the way I explained it in that video. Qualitative, which is more human subjects oriented, where you're trying to capture stories. It's all about words. There's a third category of research, and as I searched the web, I was trying to figure out, okay, has anybody talked about this? Is there stuff out there on this? I couldn't find anything, and so I'm going to take a stab at it, at least given my thinking. So the third type of research that I think exists is this idea of what I call things and stuff research. Early in this video series on research, I think I gave the definition, but again, my thought of things and stuff is you're creating an apparatus, you're creating something. It usually doesn't involve human beings, usually doesn't involve statistics. And so the way I would define the goal of things and stuff research, and this is kind of the way I wrote it out, to test something such as hardware, software, an apparatus, a device, an algorithm, under certain conditions to see if it succeeds or fails at a certain level. And so as I wrote out that kind of goal, I mean, words that I underlined, for number one, how you're testing something. There are certain conditions that it has to meet. It's typically, a lot of times it's binary. It's just, does it work or not work at a certain level? So to test something under certain conditions to see if it succeeds or fails at a certain level. Some characteristics of this type of research. As I said, it typically does not include humans. Humans from the standpoint of like a qualitative study. It doesn't usually include stats or statistics from the standpoint of where you're trying to you set an alpha and you're looking for a p-value and so on. You either accept or reject a null in that way. I will say oftentimes the hypotheses in things and stuff research might be a simple if-then statement like you learned back in 6th grade or 5th grade or whatever grade it was that we learned about simple scientific statements that are aimed at, if this, then that kind of scenario. As I said, it's oftentimes binary. It either works or it doesn't work. It's often technical or very applied, hands-on, but I think to some degree it can also be theoretical. I think of like something like mathematics, for where you're actually trying to create to create a mathematical equation, function, whatever, and it's all a product of the mind. It's all theoretical, but it's still either it's going to solve it or it's not going to solve it, right? So I think it could be theoretical, although I'd say most of the time I'm thinking in terms of it being applied. So I sometimes describe it as a one and done. So you test it and it either works or it doesn't. And usually the method associated with things and stuff's research typically provides an inordinate amount of detail relative to the thing being studied. In patent terms, I would almost call it, a first public enabling disclosure type of thing where there's enough detail that somebody could actually replicate or do whatever. So the rest of this video, I want to focus a little less on like method types because I was trying to stretch my brain. I really can't think of how I would define various methodologies under this technique. Instead, I'd like to just focus on, if you were writing a chapter 3, a methodology chapter on things and stuff, what would that chapter include? So there's basically, I think, 5 things that I listed out here. And it's basically the words that I emphasized from the goal at the beginning of this video. The very first thing is to describe the something. What is the thing or the stuff? Again, it's with enough detail that it's almost like a first public enabling disclosure for, in an applied way, for patent. It more than likely is going to go into intricate, like thing level detail, almost to the degree, where you could almost replicate it. So, if I were thinking about like an algorithm for computing, it would basically be the actual algorithm, right? If it were an apparatus, it would be a detailed bill of materials kind of thing as to what are all the parts and pieces, almost to the degree that somebody could actually build it. It may even include, mechanical drawings of some sort. So when I talk about describing the something, my experience with a lot of things and stuff kind of research is that the methodology gives inordinate detail about the thing or the stuff being tested. Second thing is like, we're testing something. So the question is, how are you going to test it? And so usually the methodology and the things and stuff study is going to provide like procedural detail on how to do something and really like detail level. Now, I would say that sometimes this could be detail. It's really about the detail of how the test is performing, not the detail of the thing, as I described a minute ago. So, so the testing environments, if I'm using a computer algorithm, so the how of testing would be, for example, giving an inordinate description of what kind of computer I am running that algorithm on as I test it. So it's almost like the how you're going about testing it. Third would be, and I had trouble kind of articulating this, so hopefully it comes out right. Like, what are the conditions of testing? And that could be generic conditions. It could also be specific conditions. It could be a description of the environment in which the thing is going to operate. It could be, am I stress testing this thing, or am I testing under like quote unquote normal conditions or a homeostatic kind of condition? And then you have to have enough details there that somebody can actually replicate the test that you're doing. And the hard thing about describing these things is without a context, it's really hard to, it's because it's in the actual details that this comes forward. Now, number 4, the idea of succeeds or fails. And instead of like repeated measures like you would have in a statistical quantitative study, or the collection of words where you're actually looking for themes to emerge, in a things and stuff study, you need to define what defines success, and how do you know success, right? It may be that it just, an algorithm processes the image the way it's supposed to, or an apparatus creates something the way it's supposed to, or it measures it the way it's supposed to, or whatever the case may be. But in addition to the succeeds or fails, it's not just about what the measure is for success or failure, but also how do you know? In other words, how do you know when you've gotten there? So that's number 4. And then number 5 is typically with things and stuff research, at least my experience in working with students that are doing it, is it's oftentimes a succeeds or fails at a certain level. Like if I were doing a computing algorithm, I want it to succeed, to be able to crunch whatever it's supposed to crunch or do whatever it's supposed to do, and I want it to be 20% more efficient than prior methods, or I want it to be able to do it this way or that way. And so a lot of my experiences in computing and in algorithms and software and that kind of stuff, hopefully you can apply this to other kinds of things and stuff, but oftentimes this number 5, as far as like the specific level, oftentimes, and I, when I'm working with students to develop proposals on this, I oftentimes say it's like you want to provide this specific level because it's almost like it's the equivalence of your alpha level as it relates to quantitative research, that uses statistics. And so you really want to project that target you're trying to hit ahead of time, because if you actually hit it or exceed it or whatever when you test it, if you haven't laid that out ahead of time as your target, it's kind of like, oh, I meant to do that, as opposed to, typically you want to actually lay it out ahead of time in a quantitative space. Also, the comment about at a specific level, oftentimes we're talking about, how much faster, how much cheaper, how much easier, or how much better. So when you're thinking about specific levels, that oftentimes if I'm working with somebody who's developing a things and stuff proposal and they're struggling with, at what level, how do I define that? It's basically the idea of, defining how it's faster, how it's cheaper, how it's easier, or how it's better. So those 5 areas, I come back to the goal, and it's to test something, right, under certain conditions to see if it succeeds or fails at a certain level. And so to me, that kind of rounds out our discussions of methodologies. As I look at research methodology books and stuff, and as I have over the years, I really haven't found a book that kind of divides it up into 3. Oftentimes it's either quant or qual, and that's all, the end of discussion. But I think there's this third category of what I affectionately again call things and stuff, and the methodologies in those kinds of projects is significantly different than what you might see in a quant or a qual study. as you would expect. So hopefully you're finding these useful. I mean, we're starting to come to the end of what I think I'm going to be talking about relative to research series. I don't know where I'm going to go after this. Some topics that I have left that I'm thinking about talking about is kind of talking about different types of measurements in quantitative, the idea of nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio scales, and the implications of that. Talking a little bit, I think a video on validity and reliability in research, particularly as it relates to instruments, measurement instruments, would be probably a good thing to do. Copyrights is something that I think I need to talk about yet. I may talk about data management. And I may talk about scales of measurement. I don't know. We'll see. I wrestle with some of these ending topics because some of them are esoteric in nature, not totally applied. But I do think these are all kind of important to the overall, understanding research kind of thing. So we probably got at least 3 or 4 more topics in the research series, and then we'll see where we go from there. I will acknowledge that next week I'm not going to be posting a video. If you're following along with these, next week I'm taking off and getting a little R&R, and so I won't be posting a video, but I plan on kind of finishing up this series when I get back. After 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, however many it ends up being, I'll kind of figure out where we go from there. So hopefully you're finding this useful. Thanks for those of you who drop a line and let me know what you think about the videos and like them or whatever. I appreciate the connection, but I do hope this is helping individuals. So have a great day. Stay warm, stay safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye.